Welcome everyone. Today I will be sharing digital SAT words in context tips, tricks, and strategies. So without further ado, let's jump straight into the video. So my number one tip is don't waste a lot of time on vocabulary questions. If you don't know any of the words, just guess and move on. So why do I say this? If you have watched my previous video, and if you haven't, please check it out. I'll link it somewhere above. If you watched my previous video, you know that time management is very, very, very important on the digital SAT. And the hardest questions on the digital SAT and the questions which are worth the most points are the reading questions. So, to have more time for reading questions, which require a lot of comprehension and cognitive abilities, we need to minimize the time we spend on everything except reading questions, such as grammar, notes, and vocabulary. And especially vocabulary, because vocabulary questions don't require that much comprehension as reading questions. You either know the meaning of the words or you don't. And if you know, you're lucky. If you don't, you can't do anything about it. A mistake I noticed a lot of people doing is if they don't know the word, they just sit and blindly look at the question, trying to remember the meaning of the word or trying to come up with a meaning, which is a waste of time. So if you eliminated, if you have A, B, C, and D, if you eliminated A and D and you have B and C, and you can't pick between the two because you don't know the definition of either of them, just pick a guess, make a guess. Like, don't make it completely random, make it a slightly educated guess, but take a guess and move on. And don't think about it again, because you will be able to save a lot of time and use that time to solve the reading section of the digital SAT. So that's my number one tip. And here I'll give you an example. So let's look at this question. Ophelia Zepeda's contributions to the field of linguistics are something. So, we are making a claim about Ophelia Zepeda's contributions, and then we are giving an example. So, based on that example, we can find the answer in the blank. Her many accomplishments include working as a linguistics professor and bilingual poet, authoring the first Tohono O'odham grammar book, and co-founding the American Indian Language Development Institute. Okay, in the example, we are seeing that she did a lot of stuff in the field of linguistics. She uh, worked as a linguistics professor and a poet, she authored a book, and she co-founded something. So we can say that her contributions are like large or something like that. Now, let's look at the answer choices. A, B, C, and D. A is pragmatic. Pragmatic means practical, something an action rather than a theory. So, we are not seeing that because her contributions are both theoretical and pragmatic. So she works, which is pragmatic, but she's also an author, which is theoretical. So we cannot say it's A. Controversial. Controversial means that it kind of argues with the ideas that are held by the majority, or disagrees by some idea or disagrees some idea or belief that is held by the majority. But that's not the case. So we can safely eliminate A and B. But now let's look at C and D. Extensive, well, extensive, probably, like, judging by the word, we can say that extensive means we can say that it kind of fits. But universal, let's look at universal. Um, okay, universal doesn't really fit here because, let's say, now, as you can see, I'm not able to pick between C and D. And this is what happens to a lot of people. So here I know the correct answer just because I have solved this question before. But a lot of people, so I gave you like an example of how someone else can be solving this question. And as you can see, a person who's solving this question might not be able to pick between C and D because both of them sound somewhat correct. So what do we do in this case? Well, first of all, if you know the definition of one of these words, then congratulations, you'll probably be able to answer this question correctly. But international students usually don't know like the definition of all four words in the answer choices. So what I suggest doing is just take a guess, either extensive or universal. At the end of the day, there's like not much that you can do. And the best thing you can do is just take a guess and move on to save time. So that's my number one tip. Tip number two. This is very, very important and you have to master this skill. And I have a lot of examples to show how it's done. Search for hints like similarities and contrasts within the passage itself. Usually, like probably 85-90% of the time, the correct answer is hidden somewhere within the passage itself. So, yeah, this is completely true. So, always read the passage carefully and try to understand the passage, and always, always, always look for hints within the passage. Because, like, as I said, 90% of the time, the correct answer is in the passage itself. Now, I'll show you some examples to prove this. Let's look at the question above. Researchers and conservationists stress that biodiversity loss due to invasive species is something. Okay, now this is a very common structure for vocabulary questions on the digital SAT. First, they make a general statement and then they exemplify the statement by saying, for example, or to exemplify, or for instance. And these kinds of questions are the easiest because just by reading the example, we can find out what should be said in the blank of the statement. Because, as I said, the example is an example for the statement which is made before that. For example, people can take simple steps, such as washing their footwear after travel, to avoid introducing potentially invasive organisms into new environments. Okay, avoid introducing. So, in the first part, they're making a claim. Biodiversity loss is something. And then they're giving us an example. People can take simple steps such as washing their footwear after travel to avoid introducing potentially invasive organisms into new environments. What is the example? What is the example doing in the second sentence? It is giving us an example of preventing invasive organisms like coming into new environments. The example is for preventing something, and that's just logical. So, by washing their footwear, they're preventing invasive organisms. So, biodiversity loss due to invasive species is what? It is preventable. Let's try to put that in. A. Preventable. So, researchers and conservationists stress that biodiversity loss due to invasive species is preventable. And then they say, for example, logically, what should the example be after they made a statement that it is preventable? The example should be of someone trying to prevent it or someone taking some kind of action to prevent it. And that is exactly what the example is doing in this case. So, in this case, the answer will be preventable, A. Let's look at the one below. Due to their often strange images, highly experimental syntax, and opaque subject matter, many of John Ashbery's poems can be quite difficult to something, and thus are the object of heated debate among scholars. Okay, so first of all, again, they're telling us something. So they're saying that John Ashbery's poems are consist of strange images, highly experimental syntax, and opaque subject matter. Okay, and then they are giving us a direct effect of that. Because of this, his poems can be quite difficult to something. And then they're giving us the effect of this effect. Thus, are object of heated debate among scholars. Now, once again, think logically. Do not overthink. Think logically. Why can be a poem an object of heated debate? Well, it's usually when there is something controversial in the poem, something which defies like certain beliefs, or when it is hard to understand. Now, let's look at the first sentence. They say it has strange images. It has highly experimental syntax. Well, as an international student, I don't really like precisely know what highly experimental syntax is, but that won't stop me from answering this question correctly. So it has strange images. Logically, strange images can be quite hard to understand. An opaque subject matter. What does opaque subject matter means? Well, it means that it is not clear. The subject matter is not clear. And not clear. What does not clear mean? Something which is not clear is something which is hard to understand. So we are getting a lot of hints in the passage itself that the word in the blank should be something which is similar to difficult to understand. And which word from the answer choices matches that? It is C, interpret, because to understand something is to interpret something. So the correct answer will be C. Another quick tip that I will give, it's not a huge tip, but it's a quick one. A lot of people overcomplicate the questions. Usually, the first answer that comes to your mind is the correct one. A lot of people think of like they see a simple word and they know that it matches the context, but just because it is quite simple, they choose not to pick it as their correct answer because they think that such a simple word cannot be the correct answer in a paragraph with such hard meanings, and then they just end up choosing a word which sounds more complicated, which is not good. So, even if the word is simple, if it's the first thing that comes to your mind when you are reading the question, it is usually the correct answer. So, that's just a really quick tip. Okay, let's see more examples. Monica Lopez and others at Brazil's Something Institute are studying the freshwater stingray species Something rex to determine whether biological characteristics, such as the ray's age and sex, have something effect on their toxicity, on the toxicity of their venom. Okay, now again, they are making a statement. Some people are conducting some research to determine whether something affects the toxicity of the venom. And then they are providing us more detail, as you can see. This is another structure. They make a claim or a statement, and then they provide more detail or try to explain it more so that a person can understand it easier. They're doing that here. That is to see if differences in these traits are associated with considerable variations in venom potency. Okay, here, this is very important. Look for hints, look for the correct answer within the passage itself. Look at parallels. So here, they made a statement. Something, something, does something have a like something effect, so we need to describe the effect here. Have something effect on the toxicity of their venom. And then, as I said again, they're giving us more detail. These traits are associated with considerable variations. What are variations? Variations is something which happens because of the effect of something. So, effect on the toxicity, does it make any variations in venom potency. And what are these variations which are stated in the further explanation? These are considerable variations. So the effect should also be something considerable. Considerable effect, considerable variations. That just 100% makes sense and is 100% logical, because that's the only hint we are being given in the passage. Because if we wouldn't have that word considerable, we just couldn't be able to find what kind of effect it is. So it is logical to say that considerable, or a word which has a similar meaning to considerable, should be the correct answer. And if we look at the answer choices, the only choice which matches that is D, substantial. All right, next example. Former astronaut Ellen says that although she doesn't have a definite idea of when it might happen, something that humans will someday need to be able to live in other environments than those found on Earth. Okay, once again, some kind of statement. And then they say this conjecture. So pay attention to this word. This conjecture. So everything that is said before this, so the first sentence is what? It is a conjecture. And what is a conjecture? A conjecture is a statement or a conclusion that is made without full evidence. So in mathematics, a conjecture is some kind of like some kind of formula or some kind of theorem which people know is true, but they cannot 100% prove that it is true. So that's a conjecture. It is a hypothesis, not a hypothesis, it is a conclusion that people know is true, but they don't have like enough evidence to prove that it's true. Okay. And then look at the first sentence. Although she doesn't have a definite idea of when it might happen. So she doesn't have a definite idea, but she still does something. So what can someone do? Or what can someone say about a certain topic when he doesn't have a definite idea of that topic? He will give an opinion. Is that right? Yeah, so he will not, or he will make some kind of prediction. So if a person doesn't have a definite idea, he will probably make some kind of prediction on that topic. So she predicts that humans will someday need to be able to live in other environments. And it matches the next part, this conjecture. So she like kind of knows that humans will someday need to be able to live in other environments, but she cannot 100% prove it. So predicts matches this one. So we need to find a word which has a similar meaning to predict. Demands doesn't match that at all. Like she cannot demand that humans will someday need to be able to live in other environments. Let's look at B. Speculates. Speculates matches perfectly. To speculate something is to, like, once again, to kind of predict that something will happen. To speculate that something will happen is to think that it will happen. So you don't definitely know that it will happen, but you think that it will happen. Let's look at doubts. Doubts actually is the different, like, is the opposite of what we're looking for, because she's not doubting that humans will someday need to be able. It's being said that her interest in future research missions to the moon. So she has interest in future research to the moon. But if she has interest in future research missions to the moon, how can she doubt that humans will someday need to be able to live in other environments than those found on Earth? This doesn't match the logic of the passage at all. And establishes. No, establishes is when you're 100% certain about it, but that's not the case. It is clearly being said in the passage that she doesn't have a definite idea. So if she does not have a definite idea, she cannot establish. So B is the only correct choice. Next question. Following the principles of community-based participatory research, tribal nations and research institutions are equal partners in health studies conducted on reservations. Okay. A collaboration between the Crow tribe and Montana State University, something this model. Okay, now again, we are getting a statement, a collaboration between the Crow tribe and Montana State University, something this model. This is a general statement. And probably after this, they are just going to give us an example to prove this statement. This is a very, very common structure on the vocabulary questions of the digital SAT. First of all, general statement, then some example to prove this statement, or something like some additional information for this statement. But in this case, we are probably going to get an example for this statement. And based on that example, we can work backwards to find what is missing in the statement. Tribal citizens worked alongside scientists to design the methodology and continued to assist in data collection. Okay, so there is some kind of model. They're saying this model. And to find what kind of model it is, we have to look at the first part of the sentence. Following the principles of community-based participatory research, tribal nations and research institutions are equal partners. And then we are having what? We are having an example. Tribal citizens worked alongside and equal partners matches. So, what word is missing here? What are we doing to this model in the next part? We are exemplifying it. We are giving examples for this model. So, the correct answer will be D. Question 5. Researchers have struggled to pinpoint specific causes for hiccups. So they cannot pinpoint specific causes for hiccups, which happen when a person's diaphragm contracts blank. So it contracts in some way. So contracts energetically or periodically, I don't know. But to find that, we have to read the next part. However, neuroscientist Kimberly Whitehead has found that these uncontrollable contractions, you see, the the passage itself has the answer to the question. Contracts are what? Contracts are uncontrollable. So we need to look for a word which has a similar meaning to uncontrollable. And that is involuntarily. When you do something involuntarily, you don't do it like by your own will. And that matches uncontrollable. So the correct answer is A. Smoothly and beneficially do not match that because um, there is nothing that says that the contractions are beneficial, and there is nothing that says that the contractions are smooth or strenuous. So the only answer which matches is involuntarily. And we found it just by reading the passage and finding the hints within the passage itself. The parasitic dodder plant increases its reproductive success by flowering at the same time as the host plant it has latched onto. In 2020, something Wu and his colleagues determined that the tiny dodder achieves this something with its host by absorbing and utilizing a protein the host produces when it's about to flower. Okay, so again, we are having some kind of statement. The daughter plant increases something something by flowering at the same time as the host. And then we are just given further information. Wu and his colleagues determined that the tiny daughter achieves this something with its host. This something with its host. By saying this, we are referring to what is said before this. So we're referring to the first question. This something with its host. So maybe this connection with its host. Or this relationship with its host, because what is being said in the first passage, or what is being described in the first passage, is the relationship between the daughter and his host, because we're like they told us that the daughter plant increases its reproductive success by doing what? By flowering at the same time as the host plant. So we need to find an answer choice which matches that. Let's look at D. Moderation doesn't match. Prediction. There is nothing about predicting something in the passage. So do not overthink. Did you see anything about prediction in the passage? No. B. Hibernation. Hibernation is when someone sleeps for a long time. Did you see anything in the first sentence? Just like just by looking at this, like this word, this, you know that the answer should be somewhere in the first sentence. In the first sentence, did you see something about prediction? No. Anything about hibernation? No. Anything about moderation? No. Anything about synchronization? Yes, you did. At the same time means synchronization. So, this is our signal. The word this was our signal that the correct answer is 100% something that was said in the first sentence. Next question. Although the playwrights hoped that their play would be something when performed live, critics generally agreed that the production and performances had the opposite effect. Okay, the word although is a signal that we are going to have some kind of contrast. So if we are provided with some example, we should usually pick what is the opposite of the meaning of that example. So although the playwrights hoped that their play would be something, critics agreed that the production had the opposite effect. It was wearying audiences instead of energizing them. So they hoped that it would energize them, but it was wearying them instead of energizing them. So I don't know what wearying means. Let's say I don't know what wearying means, but I know that it is the opposite of energizing them. And by just logically thinking, I know that the playwrights hoped that their play would be energizing when performed live. So we need to find an answer choice which is similar in meaning to energizing. And it is C, rousing, because rousing means energizing. Well, yeah. And then next question. So this will probably be the last example. Bicycle sharing systems allow users to rent a bicycle at one location within a city and return it to any other designated location in that city, which can cause serious problems of bicycle supply and user demand within the city system. Tohru Kiguchi uses open source data and statistical modeling to identify when a high number of users making one-way trips is likely to leave some locations within the system, something bicycles, and other areas with insufficient supply. Once again, look for hints, look for contrasts, look for similarities. In this case, we have a contrast. Some locations within the system, something, and other with insufficient. What is insufficient? It means having a very little amount. So we're comparing. So logically, here we should have something which is over sufficient, more than sufficient. Excess, and like a word like excess would match here. Within the system, some locations within the system with an excess of bicycles and other areas with insufficient supply. So we should basically choose an answer choice which is opposite in meaning to insufficient. Let's see. Susceptible. Is it opposite in meaning to insufficient? No. Depleted. No, depleted means like depleted is kind of similar to insufficient. Contingent. No. Saturated. Yes. Saturated with something means having a lot of something, and insufficient means having a little amount of something. So C is going to be the correct answer. And how did I identify that? Just by knowing that I need to have a word which is opposite in definition to insufficient, because we are making some kind of contrast in this case. Okay, and now I want to share with you some resources to practice vocabulary questions. First of all, do the old SAT reading papers as I advised in the previous video. So old SAT reading papers have vocab questions which are very, very similar to digital SAT vocab questions. So make sure to do them because it will both improve your comprehension and help you with vocabulary. And then use both the old and new Han Academy. So Han Academy has practice for the old SAT and for the digital SAT, and I advise you to use both of them. If you're going to use the old digital if you're going to use the old Han Academy SAT, then scroll to the precision and concision section in the grammar section of the old SAT, and you will have questions like the one I put in the presentation. But if you're going to use the digital SAT Han Academy, then go to the words in context section and apply the tips that I mentioned. If you apply the tips a lot, you will be able to do them do it quickly on your own test. And then I'd like to give general tips. If you have a lot of time before your test, I would highly recommend you to read books, and while reading, you should immediately search the definition of unfamiliar words and write them down. And you should do the same thing while solving SAT questions. So when you're solving an SAT question, if you see an unfamiliar word, write it down and immediately search the definition. So you will understand how to use that word in a context. This is much more effective than blindly learning the definition of 300 most popular words for the digital SAT. Yeah, this is a big mistake that some people do. This helps understand the meaning of the word in a context rather than blindly memorizing the definition. And as I said, do the same thing while solving SAT questions. When you do this, you will recognize certain patterns and popular words. So the SAT has certain popular words, and I don't remember all of them, but two of them that I remember are refute and infer. So make sure to do this to identify similar patterns. So this is the end of the video for words in context. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, please share it with your friends, drop a like, and subscribe. Goodbye.